In the 1980s, the Ford Mustang, which was the icon that helped define American performance for 2 decades, found itself at a bit of a crossroads. Lagging sales, surging fuel prices, and a shifting in tide of consumer preferences had pushed the once proud pony car dangerously close to the edge of extinction. Once the face of youthful freedom, the Mustang now seemed like a relic from another era, one that no longer aligned with the demands of a leaner, more efficiency-focused automotive world. And sales told this story. In 1979, the Mustang was still selling at respectable numbers, almost 370,000 units being sold that year. But 4 years later, in 1983, that figure had plummeted to barely 121,000 cars. A combination of rising gas prices, tightening emissions markets, and an increasingly competitive import market had eaten deeply into the Mustang's market share. At the same time, the front-wheel drive revolution was in full swing. Japanese automakers like Honda, Toyota, and Nissan had seized the moment, flooding the US market with efficient, reliable, and modern front-wheel drive compacts that felt light years ahead of Detroit's aging platforms. Ford, like its big 3 rivals, knew it had to adapt or get left behind. And in a bold, almost unthinkable move, it considered reimagining its crown jewel, the Mustang. This wasn't to be a small update or a mild refresh either. No, Ford's plan was to completely reinvent the Mustang, transforming it from a rear-wheel drive V8-powered muscle coupe into a front-wheel drive 4-cylinder import fighter. This project was ambitious, controversial, and in hindsight almost a death sentence. Codenamed the ST16, the proposed Mustang replacement was a radical departure, one that thought to shed the old-school image in favor of something leaner and more in step with global tastes. To execute this vision, though, Ford could not do it alone. Instead, they leaned into one of their most strategic partnerships of the 80s, Ford's growing alliance with Mazda. At the time, Ford owned about 25% of Mazda and had steadily been deepening its ties with the Japanese automaker throughout the 1980s. The companies had collaborated on several platforms and products, sharing engineering and development costs, heck, even assembly lines in some cases. Mazda brought advanced small car engineering and drivetrain tech to the table, while Ford offered the scale, marketing muscle, and crucially, deep access to the North American market. For the ST16 project, Ford planned to base the car on Mazda's front-wheel drive G platform, which underpinned the Mazda 626 and the sporty MX-6 coupe. The ST16 would share much of its DNA with Mazda's own offerings, promising smoother handling, better fuel economy, and a design ethos that leaned more in tune with Tokyo than that of Dearborn. The design team, led by designer Toshi Saito, was tasked with translating this platform into some kind of amalgamation of a Mustang for the new era. See, to Ford executives, this seemed like the financially viable option to continue the Mustang name. To them, it really looked like the future. But to Mustang loyalists like you and me, it was blasphemy. In 1987, word of this new project was leaked to Christopher Sawyer of Auto Week magazine, and what followed was nothing short of a corporate nightmare. Take the recent Cracker Barrel controversy and multiply it by infinity. Sawyer's article blew the story wide open, and the backlash was immediate. Thousands of Mustang fans flooded Ford's mailroom with letters demanding that the company reconsider. And these weren't just casual complaints. This was full-blown outrage from one of the biggest enthusiast groups there was in the country when it came to automobiles. The very identity of the Mustang was under threat, and those that were faithful to that identity were not going to let it go down without a fight. Inside Ford, the backlash triggered a full-scale crisis. The execs who thought this was a great idea were now left scrambling to assess the damage, and internal factions began to form. On one side, there were the pragmatists, and they believed that a front-wheel drive Mustang was the only way to stay competitive. On the other side, the traditionalists, who were led by Alex Trotman and John Coletti inside of Ford, fought to preserve the soul of the Mustang, with its rear-wheel drive and optional V8 power up front. And thankfully, when the dust settled, the traditionalists won. The ST16 project would not become the next Mustang. The Mustang itself would live on with that sacred nameplate. It would be updated, sure, but fundamentally it would remain the same. But now, Ford was left with a weird problem. They had fully developed a futuristic coupe with no name and no identity. So they reached back into their archives, back to a series of sleek, forward-looking concept cars that were designed by their Italian subsidiary, Ghia, and they pulled a name out of that hat that they felt was fitting for this new car that would have been the Mustang, and thus the Ford Probe was born. The first-gen Ford Probe was a short, wedge-shaped, agile little car that was somewhat reminiscent of the second-gen RX-7, with a busier and blockier front grille. The design was clean and sleek, but it wasn't particularly aggressive. It had pop-up headlights in the front, a very short tail in the back, with wraparound rear lights. Inside, it had a compact set of 6 gauges in a small cluster, bucket seats, and barely usable back seats, but they were there. The interior was a bit plasticky, and it has been called cheap, but it at least got the job done, and to be frank, it wasn't much cheaper feeling than other Ford products of the time. Initially, the Ford Probe was offered for that first model year in 1989 with only an inline-4 engine, which you could get naturally aspirated or turbocharged. The turbocharged version was actually pretty quick for the era and price point, with 145 horsepower available at 4,300 RPM and around 200 foot-pounds of torque at 3,500 RPM. It had a 7.8 to 1 compression ratio, and it ran about 7 pounds of boost. It could do 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds and finish the quarter mile in 15.3 with an overall top speed of 131 miles per hour. It wasn't going to lay down massive tracks of burning rubber, but performance-wise, it wasn't that far off of a V8 Mustang in terms of its quickness. Ads at the time showed the Probe on a slalom course, not a drag strip, which was really all you need to know about how it was positioned from a performance standpoint. The V8 Mustang was still there for the muscle guys. The Probe was for a buyer who was leaning to get something more Japanese. It was offered with a choice of a 4-speed automatic or a 5-speed manual. In America, the automatic was the more popular choice, but not overwhelmingly so. The GT model, which had the turbo on it, actually also got 3-way adjustable suspension, where you could flip the switch inside to change the level of shock dampening from the factory, which was pretty trick. And of course, 4-wheel disc brakes with ABS. The next year, in 1990, Ford added to the Probe an option for one of their V6 Vulcan engines, the same one that was available in the Taurus and the Ford Tempo. This was a naturally aspirated motor which also made about 140 horsepower and 160 foot-pounds of torque. The Vulcan-powered Probes were a bit slower than the turbo cars, but they were less peaky and offered more linear, classic power band, with an 8.2 second 0 to 60 and a 16 or so second quarter mile. Again, just a bit behind the Turbo 4 cars. Now, with all this performance stuff out of the way, upon launch we have to consider the Probe sold pretty well. In 1989, they sold almost 163,000 of them that first year, and things looked promising until they didn't. Those sales numbers quickly fell off a cliff, and by 1992, only 41,000 Probes were sold that year. Ford decided that it was time to revamp the car as sales were starting to flatline. So they assembled a team led by female designer Mimi Vandermolen, who was famous for her work designing the 75 Granada and Ford Taurus interior. That team got to work to redesign the Probe. During the course of this, they lengthened and widened the car slightly, got rid of the boxy front grille, and they kind of rounded off the car a lot more, giving into that more 90s Ford rounded corporate look than the 80s angular Probe, a design shift that we would see mimicked in the 1994 Mustang as well. Overall, the second-gen Probe standing still looked quicker than the first-gen. The rear end was lengthened, the lights were redesigned, inside the interior was still nothing to write home about, but it did have some styling changes. The main changes for the second-generation Probe came in the engine department, where buyers had a choice between 2 Mazda dual overhead cam engines, both naturally aspirated. There was the 2-liter inline-4, and then there was the Probe GT's motor, which got a 2.5-liter dual overhead cam V6. That engine made a respectable 164 horsepower at 5,600 RPM, beating the first-gen turbo by almost 20 horses and 156 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. It had a 9.2-to-1 compression ratio, and a Probe GT with a manual could do 0 to 60 in 7 seconds flat, just like the first-gen turbo cars, with a 15-second quarter mile and a 133-mile-an-hour top speed. The automatics were a bit slower, but the dual overhead cam V6 power plant was a very engaging drive. It was much more linear than that crude Turbo 4, and it really did change the experience a lot inside of the Probe. It had a whole new demeanor. In fact, Automobile Magazine in their testing scored the new Probe GT third in a nationwide driving test, behind two cars that were several times its price. So it's safe to say that the second-gen Probe was an improvement in almost every trackable metric. The second-gen Probe GT also got its own unique visual improvements, including different front and rear fascias and signature aluminum 5-spoke wheels. Once this new second-gen car was released with all that positive press, the new gen brought Probe sales back up to above 100,000 cars in that first year for 1993. But it wasn't the lift that Ford wanted, and sales started to slump yet again. In 1996, only about 30,000 Probes were sold, and Ford was getting ready to drop the model. But it managed to stay on for one more year, and sales fell to almost 17,000 cars the year after, which was pretty abysmal. Compared to a lot of the cars I talk about on this channel, those numbers don't seem so small. But the number of Probes that are still around and kicking today is pretty small. In the US, manual versions and first-gen turbos are just hard to find now. Really solid condition first-gen Probes can be found from, $5,000 to $10,000, with second-gen cars in really good shape going for closer to $10,000 to $15,000. Just because it's so hard to find clean ones. The Probe GTs are probably the one you want, but even then there are still two special rare trim packages for the Probe, both of which were launched on the second-gen cars respectively in 1994 and 1997. In 1994, Ford created a special version, sometimes called the Feature Car or GT Plus, but it's most commonly referred to as the Wild Orchid. This was a package that only came on cars with that dual overhead cam V6, and it included a striking deep purple exterior along with matching color trim and inserts on various parts, like the floor mats, seats, and around the rear Probe badge. Only 3,576 of these Wild Orchid Probes were made, and very few of them are still around. And the other one was the final swan song for the Probe, the GTS. The GTS had dual racing stripes that ran along the top of the car, special chrome wheels, a rear spoiler, and a D-badged center reflector. These were based on the Probe GTs, and only about 1,400 of these cars were made. And where a Probe GT might go for $10,000, a Probe GTS, because of its rarity, might command almost double that price if you can find one. Once the second-gen Probe was dead, there was a murmur of a third-gen Probe coming about. But Ford decided to take that proposed design and turn it into the 1999 Mercury Cougar, a car which universally doesn't seem that liked. And that's how the story of the Probe ends. It couldn't replace the Mustang, and it really didn't last long either, but it was a fun little car in its own right. It just could never make up enough sales headway to be commercially viable. Every time it was redesigned, sales skyrocketed with hope and then quickly flatlined after. The Probe lost a lot of shine early on by being compared to the Mustang, and the stigma it carries as being the car that the Mustang was going to become. But nowadays, fewer people try to seriously make that comparison, and Probe owners, for the most part, enjoy their cars because it is different than the Mustang. The Probe is one of the few cases where the big automakers truly listened to its consumers and changed their grand plan because of the backlash about the Mustang redesign, which proves that there are still cases when consumer pressure can work to change the tide. The outcome was the continuance of the classic Mustang platform we all know and love, and the creation of this neat little front-wheel drive Ford. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this dive into the Ford Probe. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you hit that like button and tell a fellow enthusiast about this channel too. And be sure to like the video. Otherwise, I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.